All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about recession-proofing your workplace. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices and host of the interview series, Reimagining Company Culture. For folks who aren't familiar, AllVoices is an employee feedback management platform to systemically ask for, analyze, and accept all kinds of feedback. We know that you'll find good ideas and bad actors in real time, reducing turnover and recruiting cost, and just creating a best-in-class company culture where folks feel seen, heard, and understood on a daily basis. For today's webinar, we know that with potential impeding recession, we need to ensure that we are as prepared as possible as leaders, employees, teammates, and companies. The question is, how can you maintain being an employer of choice and keep employee morale high during a time of potential economic downturn? In this webinar, we're going to talk about some ideas around employee engagement and building that sense of belonging and really high trust environment. For some stats, in June 2022, Insight Global found that 78% of US-based workers fear that they will lose their job in the next recession. Additionally, 56% said they weren't financially prepared, and 54% said they would take a pay cut to avoid just being laid off as well. And Great Places to Work data shows that companies that really value diversity and inclusion outperform other companies by as much as 400%. Now, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what the future holds, but we could do our best to always lead with empathy, listen, and build these high trust environments. So with that, I will stop talking and I will introduce our panelists. If you could share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, your role, and the work you do at your company. We'll do a little round robin. Carmel, if you want to start with you, and I'll put the order in the doc.
Sure. Carmel Ulbrich. I am the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Program Manager at PagerDuty. And my areas of focus include our PRISM platform, which includes our ERG function, as well as our IDE advisory board and IDE activations.
Great. I'll follow up. I'm Ola Doshi-Tebo, the co-founder and CEO of Analog Teams. We're a software development and recruiting outsourcing partner.
I'm Michael Grippo. I'm the VP of Growth at .Connect, and I specialize in forming aligned partnerships with culturally aligned partners and develop growth for our company.
I will bring up the rear. I am Jen Johnson. I am the VP of People, Culture, and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Easy Cater. I've been here for about 3.5 years, and I'm a happy member of and leader of the People team.
Awesome. Thank you for giving some introductions. We have a lot of different experiences on the panel today as well, working across different functions. And I want to start off with kind of a broad question. And for our audience who is live as well, if you would like to ask any questions, you can use the Q&A function or chat us as well. But how has the potential impeding recession impacted your current workforce overall? So again, a kind of vague question to start us out as well. Ola, I'll pass to you first.
Great, thank you. It's actually been very difficult because, as you mentioned, so many people just even have the feeling that they will lose their job versus even them being on the chopping blocks. And just going on and having your team, have that fear, that innate fear that their job could be deprecated, especially a lot of the recruiting teams, right? Because we're seeing that across the board, that recruiters are being let go left and right. So it's been impactful. I've talked with a lot of the leaders in my company about, what's the morale of the team. We've gotten a lot of people who are mentioning that they are very fearful. And so I've actually taken the time to have a lot of one-on-ones and also a lot of team meetings where I talk to my team just about, look, I'm someone who really tries to be honest. So, I have the conversation that, look, no one's job is promised at this point, right? Like that's just the truth. None of the contracts that we're working with, none of the partners that we work with are promised to be working with us tomorrow. And that's just the truth of everywhere you can be. There are layoffs at the top of the food chain, at the best companies in the world, and that's trickling down to every single other person. So job security at this time may not be a real word. And we've also been impacted with some of the partnerships and contracts that we've had and had to lay off a few people as well. And so being honest and even working with those team members who are laid off, right? I still make sure to have one-on-ones with them after and actually ask them to schedule further meetings so that I can continue to check on how they're dealing in the market, what they're finding in themselves. And so the impact has been quite large, but we are, of course, we're holding strong and digging down and digging our feet into the ground.
Absolutely. And I think especially as a co-founder as well, having those one-on-ones as a member of the leadership team, nobody likes to be lied to and nobody kind of wants it to be sugar-coated, just like nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but also just having these transparent conversations, having consistent, effective communication is really important as well. And continuing those relationships is a key part of this too. Carmel, what have you seen in terms of kind of your work at PagerDuty, but also at other organizations as well in terms of that communication or how the recession might impact the workforce?
I would echo a lot of what Ola has shared. As rumblings of an impending recession began, it's normal for our workforce to develop anxiety around what may happen to their roles, especially as news of tech layoffs increased. And our core services at PagerDuty are built on crisis mitigation and incident response. And our people strategy is no different. Our strategy, which we over-communicated, because that was one of the key pillars as we started to navigate some of these conversations, is to over-communicate versus under-communicate. And so as we started to roll out our strategy, it included an operations review to identify viable areas for automation. And this allowed our workforce to focus on high impact areas within their roles. We also took notes, budgets were carefully monitored and optimized. And we also initiated a hiring pause, which allowed us time to conduct our org efficiency audit and avoid some of the outcomes of our peers. And we communicated this well before. So it was of no surprise to our workforce. And we believe that helped ease some of the concerns of our workforce, and it also increased some of the trust that we were working to build with our existing workforce.
Over communication versus under communication is always kind of where we lean as well, and making sure that people have that psychological safety to share their concerns as well, in terms of how employees can really leverage their voice and share kind of what they're thinking. What is the role of kind of that employee feedback in your current kind of people and talent strategy, knowing that people are your greatest assets? Michael, would love to pass to you to see kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, being in the hiring business, we see these things coming even, maybe a little bit earlier than other people do. So, we have a little bit more time, but it doesn't make it any less difficult, on our employees. So one of the things that we started to do is, on top of, piggybacking off of the other panelists, making sure that we are over communicating and building trust and building that, that culture. It's where the culture really gets tested, right? Whenever, these difficult decisions start to come in. So making sure that we were over communicating, keeping everyone in the loop, making sure that we had more than enough one-on-ones, group meetings, and being very authentic with the team about, what this looks like. In addition, making sure that they know that we're doing everything that we can as a leadership team to protect the people that are working with us currently. So if they are affected, we created a separate community that we can skill market out their skill set to other employers that we work with. I mean, we do have a vast network between our leadership team and also our regular team. So, we're looking for, contingency plans across the board. So, on top of, all of the things that we want to add services, where are there holes in the market that we can shift our people that are affected over to, creating a community that's just filled with information and just giving them as much information as possible so they feel prepared and they know that they have a company that's looking out for their best interest moving forward.
I love that, Michael. I love the conversation about feedback and really keeping a pulse. I think I will piggyback off of that and say, I'll start with asking a question. How do you understand what your work is if you don't understand where the work is? And so for me, it's about asking for feedback in service of me developing an action plan of engagement. That's really where our focus is as a business, is engagement. We cannot change the tide of the overarching recession conversation that's happening or impending layoffs that might come to certain organizations because of the impact of COVID, still latent impact of COVID and all of the things that we're still going through. We can't necessarily change that tide, but what we can do is focus on what we can control. And what we can control is what happens in-house in our four walls with our employee base. And for me, that's really about asking questions. I want to know what the employees' needs are. I don't know if we talk about that enough, because employees will meet their needs. And we see that, right? Like they will go to where their needs are being met. So what are those needs that we need to capture? How are you meeting them currently? What are our leaders either doing or not doing day to day? Because we really only look at OKRs and bigger impacts, and especially as you scale. So what does that day-to-day life look like for an employee? What keeps our high performers engaged, and what disengages our folks that might have things that are getting in the way of their performance? And how are we helping to support that work? I really believe in continuous start, stop, continue based conversations with our employee base, because we need to keep an accurate pulse. And I can say that I'm an employee too. And so I want folks to care about what I care about too. I want my voice to be heard in that conversation as well. And so for me, it's really about that focus. It's a focus on engagement at this point, because really that's the only thing that we can control. And I think we're fooling ourselves to think that we can control anything outside of our four walls.
I also appreciate your point about asking specific questions instead of just asking employees or team members overall, how are you doing? What is engaging you? What's disengaging you? And asking in different moments of time, because that's going to change, right? If you ask one time, that doesn't mean we're looking to check a box. We're working with people and feelings and emotions, and just that feedback, having a continuous conversation, as you were saying, Jen, is so important. How do you kind of think about, especially in this environment, in a kind of post and current COVID time, keep a pulse on that employee morale, especially as folks are on LinkedIn, we're seeing things in the news, and even if your organization is kind of stable right now, there could also be concerns. And knowing that I'm someone specifically who might not raise my hand in a 200-person meeting and say, like, I have these concerns, and some people will feel comfortable going up to a senior leader and saying, hey, I've been at the company for 5 years, I feel comfortable doing this. Lola and Carmel, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. I think that's a great question. I think for Analog, we're still quite a small company, so we're about 35 globally, and I still do I try to do a great job of meeting with as many individuals one-on-one to kind of get that pulse, as I mentioned earlier. But also what's very important is having great leadership and being able to trust that your leadership is very aligned with your value systems and what you are also the care that we have for our employees across the board. And so I make sure to meet with my leads and go through a in-depth, and I, as Jen mentioned, asking specific type of questions about each person and making sure that the conversation is being had just on the well-being the path that the person's going on, their careers, etc. So it's really about just being very intentional about it. I think sometimes with the work and, especially the hustle bustle of this time period as well, trying to make different things happen, it can get lost. And sometimes, especially as a leader, you're so focused on what's in front of you and trying to get through the tough times that you forget that some of the people behind you are having a tough time climbing the mountain, right? And so going back and making sure you give a helping hand could that morale boost. It may sometimes be more important than, the next best thing or the most innovative conversation, but letting the entire team know that if we do have layoffs, it's not because we want to lay anyone off. We deeply care about each individual, and we show that in our value set. So just keeping an ear to the ground and making it very, very intentional is how I've been able to get through this time.
A lot of great tidbits within Ola's response. I also wanted to echo and amplify a lot of what Jen mentioned earlier, because we see a lot of that in our offerings at PagerDuty. I'll talk through 3 of our high value items that we use to not only gauge employee sentiment, but also really understand if the work that we're doing essentially resonates with our workforce. So the first is we conduct annual employee surveys as well as interim pulses. We're actually in the process of revamping the questions with each survey because we want to ensure we're extracting meaningful data that points to actionable next steps. And we depend on employee pulses to help set the direction of our strategies, and more important, to validate our process. The second is we leverage our employee resource groups to represent the needs of the org. They become the liaisons between the boots on the ground and help us identify from a leadership perspective where those 2 ends meet and how do we impact and improve employee experience by listening to our core group and making necessary adjustments where needed. The third is our employee focus groups and listening sessions. So there are 2 different types of events here. The first are very targeted groups within different business orgs to identify areas of improvement. The second are open forums for employees to essentially share out some of their experiences in a safe environment. And all 3 are incredibly impactful and help us to essentially steer the course, but also identify where there might be areas outside of our purview that we need to invest additional focus into.
I think carving out that specific space with a variety of voices as well is something that needs to be really intentional, and making sure that people feel like they can give their feedback is also really important. I know we mentioned kind of a couple of times layoffs and what we've been seeing recently with tech companies and other organizations, but there's also kind of measures that are taken as well that are kind of recession, quote unquote, proofing, if you will. And some examples include pay freezes or promotion freezes, a compensation cut or reduced hours, just changes in that work schedule. How have you communicated this hard information with your team and company? I know we've been talking about over communication as well, but for folks who are listening, what does that actually look like in practice? Ola and Michael, have you seen this done? It can be at your current company or in the past as well. It doesn't have to be something that you've just experienced.
Yeah, I can take it first if you don't mind, Ola. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, these discussions are always difficult, when you're coming, into a recession. One of the things that I like to do is really set expectations up front in showing ways that we want to make sure to encourage inclusive communication, have a safe space for employees to feel like they can bring anything to us. But when having these conversations, I think it's really important to show empathy. And like I said earlier, if there's a way that we can assist them moving forward, if they are part of these, whether they are layoffs or, with what we do, a lot of it is out of our hands. So one of our clients has layoffs, and then, we have to scale back. And so we have to be proactive in making sure that, we have safeguards in place as a company to help out our employees, maybe move them to other areas of the business. So really having these conversations, having open, honest conversations, showing empathy to people as you're having these conversations, because it is a hard time, for them, and making sure that, we're doing everything we can as employers to put them in a position moving forward that can be advantageous. Some of these things are temporary, and so if we can find temporary spots to put them in while we wait out to get another client or to move them around, we do so. But I think it's really about being honest, being authentic, and showing empathy when you're having these hard discussions.
Yeah, I love that. That being honest, authentic, and empathy, that's exactly the process and the way that we took the approach as well. And one thing for me, I like to make sure that I put myself in position to communicate across the board to everyone at the same time, the same truths, so that we're all on the same page. And so, having all hands meetings and just having the conversation of here's what's going on, here's what we're foreseeing. And I'll actually at times show my schedule and say, here's what I'm specifically working on in order to try and mitigate this, or X, Y, and Z. Here's what's actually on my table. Because I think sometimes you just want to know what your leader's doing as well. Like what are they doing up there? Because everyone just thinks we just, play golf and and enjoy, which would be great, but that's not the reality. And so just having those really tough authentics. And if I can be real, I honestly looked my team in the face and I said, well, you have to just be the best. Let's just be real. Let's be honest with how this works. Anytime there are layoffs, people first cut from the bottom, and that's just the truth, right? The lowest performers go first, and the best performers go last. And we're all here to do a job. And the companies that we recruit for, the companies this company that we're in, will always have to self-preserve, right? That's just always the name of the game. And so I'm honest with each individual about, look, if you're, I guess, not happy here or not producing or not finding your way, speak up and see if there are things that you can do, like Mike said, where you can get moved into, you can get positioned elsewhere in the company. But if not, let us look for another home for you before something happens, right? I just like to be extremely honest. And if you're not in a position to do your best work, well, why is that? And let's handle that problem too, right? Because I want everyone to produce at the top. And so we're recruiters and we recruit at different companies, and we're behind TAs, we have sources, et cetera. And so I say, look, have the best numbers, hire the most people, also play the game within the game, right? So there's doing your job, but there's also making connections, networking, sometimes being your own advocate. There are things you have to do as an individual to take control of your own career. And so I make sure that all of my teams have all the tool sets in order to do that. And then I say, go out and be successful. It's up to you. And then honestly, the world will happen again, we can't control everything. So if the company shuts down tomorrow, all the advice I gave you means nothing, right? It's just the truth. But if not, and you're at the top of the list, you'll be the last one here, right? And that's very important. And that's, again, just the truth of the matter versus any type of sugarcoating that I could put on it.
I mean, empathy in communication and also setting that expectation. We've talked about on kind of previous conversations, how the performance review and just conversations with your manager should never be a surprise, because you're consistently having these conversations of what expectations are, if you're meeting them, if you're exceeding them, and if you need additional assistance there as well. We've been talking about what to do. I also think it's important to say explicitly what not to do as well. So this question is for everyone, but Jen, I would love to start with you. Have you ever been through a layoff process in your career? If so, what did you learn is really important to do and not do as well for folks listening?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I have been through reductions in force where I was laid off. I've also been in reductions in force where I was facilitating a layoff of others. So I've been on both sides of this coin. And I think at Easy Cater, that's the most recent layoff that we went through. And I don't mind talking about that because we're very open about what we've gone through in the last few years. In 2020, COVID hit us, I mean, like square in the nose. As a business, we supply food at work and no one was at work. So of course there was going to be a reduction in force, right? Because there was a reduction in income. And so we, throughout that process, really leaned into our cultural values, and that's how we made it through. It's the first layoff experience where at the end of it, we had positive Glassdoor reviews after separating people involuntarily from a business. How does it happen, right? And honestly, it was just us being who we say we are. Because we can only control, again, what we can control, and that's our behavior, that's our reactions. It is not the climate of the environment that we work within, right? So a few things that we did that I think were really important. Again, we leaned into our cultural values. We led with empathy and compassion, which is something that folks have already touched on, how important that is. Just understanding that people are human and allowing people space to be human and react as human beings. If you're taking my job away and I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills, I don't know how I'm going to feed my family, that is a scary place to be in a pandemic, where there are not a lot of other jobs that are open and available to you, right? And so having that compassion is really important, just allowing people to emote freely without fear of repercussion, being brave and being transparent. There are a lot of companies that lack that courage to be able to say out loud, this is what we're going through as a business, this is where we are, this is real life, and you are here with us, and so we want to include you in this conversation. A lot of companies wait until the last minute to include their employees. We include our employees up front. Over communicating whenever possible, because people, when you're in a fight or flight, your brain is not working like it would if you were not in that experience. And so having repetitious conversation is really important as well. I think setting up an infrastructure for people who are separated is important. Where do they go to get resume support, assistance, interviewing, help, tips, guidance? Can your remaining people team or talent team focus their energy in that direction now that they're not hiring, right? Because obviously you're reducing headcount. And then the last, I think that's kind of overlooked, but was really important for us in finding success through that, for the folks who were impacted, not for myself, but for them, is creating a community through connecting folks who were separated. Not being afraid to do that. No, they're not all going to love you. And no, they're not all going to sing your praises in that community that you create. That's not what it's for. It's for support. Because folks need to be able to talk to people that are in similar or the same circumstances themselves in order to make it through. And really, you are providing not just physical support for people, but it's more mental and emotional support that you need to provide as an employer when you're going through any type of transition, especially one that's going to take people's jobs away.
I think creating that infrastructure, the support, and also being really proactive, thinking about how you're going to do that ahead of time and not being reactive, being realistic, taking as much as you can your specific ego out of it as well, and say people are hurting, like you were talking about, as well, and making sure that they're supported as much as they can be too. I know we talked about, it's important to put your best foot forward and to produce in a job. However, there are, not everything is equal in the world. You can't predict everything. And also we saw at COVID-19, when at the beginning of the pandemic, when we also saw job losses, women and people of color bore the brunt of most of those job losses. Job losses for women outnumbered the loss for men in the hardest hit industries, according to a couple of different studies. And along those lines of being proactive and really thinking about creating an equitable workforce, how can we really think about keeping equity top of mind when you're going through making these decisions, and also supporting folks? I get a question for anyone, but Carmel would love to pass to you first.
Sure. So I'd first start my answer by saying that so much of our identity is tied to the work that we do. There's an incredible sense of pride that we have when we can provide for ourselves and our families and our communities. And so when that identity is stripped from you involuntarily, it's stunning. It can be incredibly devastating. And we do find that it disproportionately affects underrepresented groups. So one thing that I'd urge companies to review is existing processes to determine areas that might benefit from an equity audit well before they may need to access those processes. What criteria is used to evaluate employees during a reduction in force? This goes back to your earlier question, Christina, about what people have done well. And I think adding that layer of objectivity when it comes to communicating that decision out is incredibly helpful. And it can help alleviate some of that those devastating early reactions from your workforce, because it's clear to them, A, why the decision was made and how they essentially selected those that would be ultimately impacted. I would also urge companies to identify or to really understand, has your company fully explored all options before instituting an RIF? And then also think about what benefits will you temporarily continue to reduce the burden off of underrepresented groups as they find their footing. Really being transparent with your workforce around what you've done to avoid job losses, as well as how you care for them or how you care for departing employees, goes a long way. And in a time when the market is increasingly competitive, brand reputation amongst candidates is paramount. This also goes back to something that Ola mentioned earlier around the high performance. I would also add to that is really thinking about, as an IC, as an individual contributor, your personal brand, because that's essentially what's going to carry you into that next chapter of your career. So as a proactive measure, really building on that personal brand so that if the unfortunate circumstance comes upon you where you are part of an RIF and are looking for that next stage, you've got everything in place to truly market yourself as a candidate that a company should consider hiring.
I think that is great advice, and also things to think about as well. We don't want to, again, just think about equity when it comes to reductions in force or layoffs. Is something that you should be thinking about in all processes and really have that framework to reference. I think that building a culture of belonging and high trust doesn't happen overnight, but it could easily be broken with actions over time as well. How do you continue to build high trust environments, not only during difficult times, but throughout an employee's experience, whether it is day one, their exit interview, what have you? Michael and Jen would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it goes back to a lot of the things that we covered previously. I think it's about, setting the correct expectations, creating a safe, inclusive environment where people feel comfortable speaking to their managers, creating a lot of opportunities where people have the opportunity to speak to management one-on-ones, pod meetings for us, where, you're with your pod, you feel comfortable divulging certain things to the pod, and then also throwing in anonymous surveys where we can catch problems. So kind of a catch-all with a lot of different aspects. So I think that that's important, but also, building that culture. I mean, one of the things that we do at Connect is, we also have a lot of cultural events that we're trying to increase, different events that everyone can participate in to just, we're a fully remote company. So, trying to get, everyone together and on the same page is always a challenge for us. So having trivia weeks and Bob Ross painting night and just trying to create some in-person as we're opening up more for people who feel comfortable and having that interaction that people have been missing for so long and that personal connection that I think everyone took for granted until it was taken away from us. So I think, creating that open, inclusive space where people feel comfortable sharing ideas, sharing experiences, and don't feel, and making sure that there's an outlet for every kind of person from, all the way up and down, from the top all the way to an intern level a person that works with us, and making sure that everyone has an outlet that they feel comfortable in sharing with, and really knowing your company inside and out. And I think that's important, creating the culture and just trying to keep as much of a pulse on everyone's, like everyone's been saying on here, everyone hurts differently. Everyone's a person, and, like the pandemic can be affecting everyone completely differently. So, we do a lot of breath work. We do a lot of mindfulness. We do a lot of stuff for your mental well-being, and not just for your work well-being and your productivity, to show that, we care about you more than just your productivity, but also you as a person, because we feel like, that's going to bring out the best in you moving forward. So I think some of those things, build that trust, and it creates a more open and inclusive environment.
I love that. I think that that's very real. But I think trust is just psychological safety in action, right? It means that I feel comfortable. I feel like I can show up as myself, and I'm not going to suffer repercussions for doing that. And so for me, it's I try to remind myself and frame my connection to my employer as a relationship. Because just like any relationship with any person, there are certain elements that you need in order for you to maintain or create a sense of psychological safety. And I think Michael listed a lot of those things, right? Open communication, supporting people, meeting people where they are, all of those things. I would just add a couple because I don't want to be too redundant. I think co-creating shared goals, like when I'm thinking about cultures, I'm thinking about infrastructure because that's my work. So just selfishly, that's kind of what I'm focused on, right? So I'm thinking about what structures are we creating? So do we have vehicles for folks to create understanding, to Michael's point, ERGs, some of those other small pod groups where people can come together and create shared understanding? Do we have vehicles for folks to celebrate their identities? Does that come up in our organizational structure? Are we able to find shared interests and connect over those shared interests virtually? Are we giving people the freedom they need to connect in the ways that resonate with them? I think what we're learning and what we have learned since the COVID pandemic started to impact business is that people are not okay with you telling them who they have to be anymore. That's done. That's dead. And so now we need to, as a business, reframe, restructure, and look at how we are showing up for our people versus how they're showing up for us. Are we as open and as fluid as we could be as a business to start to meet people where they are so that we can give them what they need, and then they can give us in turn what we're looking for from them? And for me, that's what creates trust. Is I know exactly what I'm getting from my job every day. I know I'm getting a check. I know that I get this title that carries some weight out in the world. I know all of those things, right? So now, are we as clear with our employees about what we're giving to them? I do not see a lot of reciprocal conversation. And for me, that's what creates psychological safety and trust. If there is a blind spot, if there's a gray space where I'm operating, I probably don't feel as trusting of that environment or those people as I should, right? And so really it's about exactly like kind of piggybacking off of what Michael said, is creating that open communication channel for trust in your organization.
I think it's Brene Brown, maybe, who says, clear is kind. So
that's it. That's real.
Communication, people want to know what to expect, and it is a two-way conversation. And it's important to, as we've said it again and again, our conversation, empathy, vulnerability, asking intentional questions as well, and actively listening to the answer. We're not looking for a one-size-fits-all approach. All right, let's get into some audience questions. Anyone can jump in. One of them is, my company just went through layoffs and my team went from 10 to 5. There's so much work to do and I feel bad that my friends and colleagues have been laid off. I'm also angry and don't want to be on the chopping block next. How do I communicate that to my manager, or should I?
Do you trust your manager? That's my question. Because if you don't, then don't. It's not a safe environment to be in if you don't, right? And it's not safe to be vulnerable when you don't. So really it's about gauging that trust for me, but I'd like to hear other people's thoughts too.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jen. I mean, I think that that's what we're all striving for. And, you know, I know where I'm at, it's what we strive for, is to make sure you do trust us so you can feel comfortable asking those questions, and that we have a response for you as a leadership team in what our direction looks like, and that you feel comfortable with what the direction looks like. Is it a direction that you feel comfortable with as a company? Is it a direction that you feel like we are going to rebound from, and that this is a temporary situation? And if not, do we have a solution for you for how we can get some of this work off your plate? You know, like, or is this just an infinite item that we have not figured out as the management team? So I think they're all very they're very poignant questions that you know that we need to answer as a leadership team, and we need to have answers for these specific questions. And I think that you, hopefully, if you do trust your management, you can ask these questions and they will have an answer for you.
And I'd like to add, if you don't trust your management, then you should probably start thinking and making actionable steps.
I have so many follow-up questions to that audience question, especially around things like, did your company create space for the remaining employees to essentially voice some of their concerns in a safe space? Because it is a really real phenomenon of survivor guilt. Those that were impacted, there's a certain level of guilt associated there, and it's really important to address and honor those feelings. And to the earlier point about talking with your manager, if you feel comfortable, if you don't, it's perfectly okay to go above that first level of manager and find another person that you do trust within your company to not only voice your concerns, but maybe even share some suggestions on how to rebuild some of that lost trust within the organization. Sounds like they downsided by half, which means there's probably a redistribution of tasks. Someone's got to figure out what to do there. And so if we think about silver lining, this might be an opportunity for that individual or other individuals to step into that leadership role and say, we had a really awful thing happen, but I'm going to step in and try to make sense of this so that we can continue to move forward. So there are a lot of things to consider as something like that happens.
Those are good questions to ask and a good point of reflection to say, do I have trust in my manager? Do I have trust with anyone at this organization? What is my level of confidence here? Another question we have is from an employee perspective of, I'm an employee who was laid off. How do I interview for another job as someone who was laid off? Does this paint me as a low contributor? How do I communicate that?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
That's a real that's a good question, because we all just said in one way or another that what we know is to be true is that folks will cut the bottom performers first, right? And so I think that's a very real and honest question to ask. I don't know if I have the best answer, but I'll give one. I think that you lead with honesty about what you've experienced. And you don't paint the employer in a negative light, because people don't like that. And it seems like you're kind of trying to pass the buck, or, you know, do some sleight of hand where you asking me to look over here at the employer versus looking at you as an employee. So I wouldn't say to do that, but I would suggest that you just lead with honesty about your experience, that you were at a business that you thought was going to offer you some longevity. And unfortunately, because of the climate that we're all collectively in, that's kind of the good thing about where we are right now, is that people get it. It's not just one company, it's every company that's experiencing these pain points. And people should be able to resonate with that, you know, that take on where you've been and why you were let go. But I'd love to hear from other folks too, because I don't know if that was the best answer.
No, I think that was actually a great answer. Because it is a tough position to be in. I think I would also just not really make it about being laid off. I would make it, if you're in an interview or wherever it is, highlight more of what you've been through, you know, your skill sets, your achievements, what you were able to accomplish, whether it was a short time or a long time. And I think right now the entire industry is just going through layoffs in general. And then especially if you're in like a people's position or a recruiter position, those are kind of being cut first, whether you're a good performer or not. So there's a level of understanding and compassion and empathy going on in the entire community about people being laid off. So you can address it and just address that the company went through some layoffs, maybe give a quick statistic, 33% of the workforce. I mean, that's a large amount. And then you just go on to, this is my career, this is what I've done, and just try to kind of move past it being authentic, but also that doesn't define you either, right? So don't let it define your conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of them. They make really good points. I think that there was a stigma at one point in my hiring career where it was more of a big deal. And I think now it's much more acceptable. So I think Ola's suggestion that you really highlight your specific attributes. And I mean, I would say that, for anyone that's in that situation, there are ways that you can sharpen your interviewing skills. There are you need to sharpen. Sometimes I've been part of layoffs and I've taken it as an opportunity to strengthen my own skills, my interviewing skills, sharpen up my resume, just sharpen up, how I'm explaining, what I do well, and really highlighting, how I can be an asset to your company. And I think it provides you with an opportunity to reflect, gain clarity, and improve on your candidacy prior to moving in. So
I think the environment now is a bit more friendly towards these types of circumstances. To Michael's point, there's less of that stigma. I find, at least on LinkedIn especially, people are a lot more vocal about when it happens to them and actively asking for help, which is a really cool thing to come out of it. For those that are impacted, I think really focusing on what you did take away during that time with the company is really key. And then really identifying transferable skills and then communicating what you've done in the meantime to prepare yourself for that next step in your career says a lot about a candidate. I would also say to really hit that networking hard, as much as it might be uncomfortable for people. I'm one of those people. Really marketing yourself as a viable candidate, and then really understanding what your strengths are, shortlisting those companies and those roles, and being really transparent about why you might have exited your previous company. Most of the time, recruiters and hiring managers won't really ask follow-up questions. It's just something that they're used to at this point. But just being prepared to answer those questions when they come up in a very eloquent way that continues to build yourself up as a viable candidate.
I think those are all really good answers to a very difficult question. So thank you for the person who asked, and thank you for answering. We have time for one more audience question, and then we'll do a round robin of a final good old call to action. Jen, this is from someone who's listening live. You mentioned the group of employees who had been laid off or part of a RIF. Can you say more about the group that was created, if it was on LinkedIn or an email listserv? I am interested in logistics, of course, however much you would like to share.
Yeah, so I can be transparent with it. So we created an in-house group, and we used our talent team, who wasn't necessarily being fully utilized at the time because they weren't hiring. We were on a freeze we enlisted their help to offer more of a full scope solution. So we created community using our Slack channel, and we created an external Slack channel as well. So we allowed those folks who were laid off to connect back to also in-house employees and our talent team. But our talent team used that channel to help support folks through resume help, interview prep, all of those things. They offered, many webinars and one-on-one support as well. And so folks kind of took that and made it what they wanted it to be. And it evolved into more of a support group where folks were offering links to jobs that they found online, and they were helping to support each other in that way without us having to fully facilitate or fully intervene in that space, because really it's no longer our space. And so we allowed folks to create what they wanted to create there. And we do that in-house as well. We're a little bit more open and fluid with how we create community.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we'll do one more audience question because I like this one as well around employee engagement. What is an example of the most innovative way your company has engaged your employees?
I can share something that PagerDuty is doing this month, actually. It may not necessarily be the most innovative, but I can tell you it is the most engaging. So it's called September. So it's a company-wide step challenge where we have Dutonians, we refer to ourselves as Dutonians, create teams. And it's basically just who can collect the most steps. And there's a philanthropic element to it where we identify an organization. In this case, it's an organization that assists children of low-income houses in Australia. And so we also provide weekly recognitions and gifts to those prizes to individuals as well as teams that rank on our leaderboard. And Dutonians are incredibly competitive. And so they have all stepped up to the challenge, and it is one of our most engaging company-wide initiatives that we are most proud of. And it's a global initiative.
Very nice. I love that answer. As someone who likes to take long walks as well. All right, so the last question, what is your call to action to recession-proofing your workplace, which we have talked about really comes down to employee engagement, effective communication, trust, transparency, vulnerability, impactful leadership. And let's go, if you could popcorn to the next person to answer, that would be great. And let's start with Jen.
Ask me that again, because I thought you just asked and answered it. So I need the question again.
That's a good point. What is your call to action to recession-proofing your workplace?
All the things that you just listed, I think you did a wonderful job. For us, it is about engagement. And engagement means whatever the employees need it to mean. And that will change over time. It will progress, right? And folks will need different things as our climate changes externally, as gas prices go up, as food prices go up, as some of these external factors that just engage natural human life come into play. We no longer have that separation of work and life. And so it comes into your work life, right? And we are going to have to respond in kind. So for us, it's engagement. And I will popcorn to Ola.
Okay. So my advice is twofold for the companies. I think that we have to be innovative in times like these. Especially if you're a recruiting company or you're talking specifically to the recruiting side, that's what I would speak to, that we're not exempt to any realities of the industry or any other industry. Facebook killed MySpace. So anything can take us out as well. And it's very important for us to find innovative ways, not just in recruiting new talent, but also what other services can you provide? And can you retrain your workforce to be able to provide those services? So to survive, you have to innovate, and we're not exempt from that at all. And for the employee's perspective, I think that it's important to acknowledge that your career is your responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the company you're at. It's not the responsibility of your managers or your leaders. It's a great to have, but the truth of the matter, it is all up to you. It is your life to own and be responsible for. So know where you sit at the company, where your performance, where you are currently and how well you're doing. Seek information to all of your questions, as been mentioned. If you don't feel comfortable asking those questions, or you don't find the answer that you're looking for, and it's difficult, that's your answer as well. So acknowledge that truth, acknowledge the reality of the world that we're in, and make sure that you actually put yourself first. It's always, the company will always preach put the company first, but the reality for you as an individual, your career matters, and the company is a great vehicle to your own internal, what we call our internal North Star. So once that vehicle breaks down or it's not providing you the value you need, make sure you're prepared to take the next step. Sorry, popcorn. Popcorn to Mike.
All right, you guys, you've taken a lot of things off the table. So really great ideas from everyone. I think that as employers, we need to be looking down and know that we are also being evaluated. I think that as an employee, you should be evaluating your leadership. at all times. I think that, making sure that you feel like they do have a plan, making sure that you do feel like they're approachable and that you can bring things to them. And if not, why? Ask some of these questions. I think that people feel kind of submissive to the industry right now. And like, I don't want to say anything because it's a difficult industry and people feel scared and insecure. And I think that as leadership, we need to know that and make sure that we're doing everything on our end to make sure they do feel secure in their leadership. And that, like not just looking at them for their work product, but also really holding ourselves accountable, and that we're doing everything that we can to weather this storm and to weather the recession, and making sure that everyone is doing their part, and that includes the leadership portion. So I'll just add in that portion, that I know at my company we're consistently evaluating our leadership, and that our messaging is clear and concise and honest, and we are creating an inclusive environment where we are looking at people's well-being, their personal mental well-being, and where everyone's at. And I think that hopefully that will create a good culture, which will in turn assist us in kind of weathering this storm. Popcorn it over to Carmel. Thank you.
Thanks. My CTAs are around internal ops, so auditing existing operations, budget management, and workforce development. If you haven't already, I'd urge you to identify skill profiles for your roles and highlight transferable skills or identify skills that overlap. I'd also encourage stretch assignments and job shadowing. Put in place a mentorship program, which also includes a sponsorship program, because one of the best outcomes of having a sponsor is having someone that will advocate for you. So if it comes down to a RIF, or there is a seat that becomes available on a leadership team, you have multiple people advocating on your behalf. And so when companies do this, they may benefit from a reshuffle versus a reduction in force. And in doing so, may also uncover ways to optimize the business along the way.
Awesome. These are great calls to action. Really appreciate everyone. Michael, Jen, Ola, Carmel, thank you so much for being on our webinar today about recession-proofing your workplace. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood. I know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you for our next webinar.